In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to load some data into your Ionic 2 applications using a HTTP request. In this tutorial, we're going to load some Json data. And if you don't already know what JSON is, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's what we're looking at on the screen right now. So it's not specific to JavaScript, it's just a string, it's just a data format, but it uses the JavaScript object syntax. So this is a JSON string that I've loaded from Reddit. If you look at the URL here, we're just grabbing a JSON feed of the GIFs subreddit. And this is obviously quite a complicated looking string, but if we just jump into the editor quickly here, if you broke this down, you'd see that it just looks like a normal sort of JavaScript object. It's got kind there as a property, and then under that we have listing, and then we have this data property here, and inside of that there's an object, and then we have let's go with the children property here, and then think that was an array. And so it's just this basic JavaScript style object. So if you've worked a bit with JavaScript before, you'd be familiar with this, and that's all a JSON string is. Now the JSON format is a really popular format to work with because it's so easy to pass in our applications. It's easy for humans to read and create, and it's also easy for our program to interpret and create an object that we can use inside of our application. So we're going to go through two scenarios in this tutorial. We're going to load in this data directly from this URL, so we're fetching some data from a remote server, but we're also going to store a local file inside of our application that's also going to be in JSON format, and we're going to load that locally. So the HTTP service can load data from a URL like this, but it can also just load in and make a HTTP request locally as well. So I've already got an application generated to use as an example, but what we're going to do is add in a provider that we're going to use to fetch this data. So if you haven't got an application you're already working in, feel free to create one and then run the Ionic generate command, which we can use Ionic G for. And we're going to create a provider called we'll call it Reddit data. Okay, so if I jump back into my project now, I'll just get rid of this string here. If I jump into the source folder and go to providers, you can see this Reddit data provider that was created for us, and this is really handy using this generate command because it actually imports the HTTP service from Angular and sets it up in the constructor by default. So if you wanted to use the HTTP service somewhere else in your application, just make sure to import that HTTP from the Angular library there, and also inject it into the constructor. You also notice that we have this second import command here, which is loading something from the RxJS library, and this is the map operator, which is going to allow us to do something with the observable that the HTTP service returns, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is create a function called getRemoteData, and we're going to make this function grab or load in that data from Reddit using the HTTP service. So to do this, we're going to make use of that HTTP service that we've injected into the constructor there. So all we have to do is this.http.get, and you can also do post requests and stuff like that, delete and put as well, if you're interested in doing those, but in this tutorial we're just going to focus on the get. So all we need to do is supply that URL that we're trying to get from. So I'll just copy and paste in the Reddit URL here, and let's just see what this does just by itself. So I'm just going to log this out. So we'll save that, and since we're going to have to interact with this provider here, we're going to have to set it up properly in the application as well. So I'm just going to jump into the module file here and import that Reddit data service. and just add it to the providers array here. And I'm going to serve the application. And then we're just going to jump back into here, and we're going to set that provider up just on the home page. So I'm also going to import that here. And once again, inject that service into the constructor so we can use it. And then I'm just going to add the IonView did load hook here, which will trigger as soon as the view is loaded. And we're going to trigger that function we're creating, so get remote data function. So we can just do this dot Reddit service dot get remote data. Now let's see what that does. Now, I've got an error there because I did the path wrong for the import. So this is relative to where the file is. So we're in the home.ts file here. I've gone up one folder and then to the providers folder, which in this case, I've only gone up to the pages folder. There's no providers folder in there. I still need to go up one more folder to access that. So if I just put in that there and save it, we should be good hopefully now. Okay, so that's working now. The function's getting called and we can see our function making the HTTP request here. And it's returning this observable. And this isn't what we want. Well, it is, but it's not the final thing that we want. You might expect this just to return the data, but it doesn't. It returns an observable. And so if you're unfamiliar with observables, I'm not going to describe them in this tutorial. I'll link to something that you can read about that. But really quickly what it is a thing we can subscribe to that's going to emit data over time. So an observable can essentially say something, and if we're listening, we can grab whatever the thing is that that observable said. So in the case of the HTTP request, the thing that it's saying that we're subscribing to, that we're listening for, is going to be the data. So this returns an observable, not the data we want, but we can get the data we want from that observable. So we don't want to log this out. What we want to do instead is subscribe to that observable. So to do that, all we need to do is append a .subscribe on the end here, and then we can pass in the data that observable is going to emit into our little handler here. And so we can just log that data out like this, save that, and we'll see what happens now. Okay, so now we have this response being logged out now, which looks a little bit more like what we want. Not exactly what we want, clearly, but it's looking a little better. So if I expand this out, we can see we have a whole bunch of stuff in here. We've got some headers, some HTTP status codes. So this says 200, which means that's good, it's worked. And then we have the actual data that we're interested in is buried in this body property here. So if you wanted, you could just grab that out of there, but there's a more, I guess a better way to do that, and that's where that map operator is going to come in. And so this map operator that we're importing from RxJS, we can use with observables, and that's what the RxJS library provides it. That's what allows us to use observables, and a map is an operator that we can use on that. And it is almost exactly like a map that you can use on normal JavaScript functions that's built into JavaScript by default, or rather you can use a map on JavaScript arrays. And again, I'm not going to get into how maps work in this tutorial. Again, I'll link to something, but essentially in terms of an array, you can apply a map function to an array to change the elements in that array based on some function. And so it's the same concept here, where we can apply the map operator to an observable and we can change the response in some way. So before we subscribe to this observable, we're going to add in a map. So we can do .map, and then we just have to describe how we want to map that data. So we want to take that response and we want to instead return or call that JSON function on that response, which is going to convert the response into an actual JSON object of data that we can use. So if I save that again and take a look at what happens, you can see now that we have a much more friendly looking object. So if I expand this out now, this is exactly the data we want. We have that. So we have kind and data here. So we've got a kind property of listing and then a data property which has an object in it, which has an array inside of it. So if we expand this out now, we can see we have that listing value there. And if we expand data, we can see all of that. We can then see the children array, and we can see a bunch of objects in there with some more data, and then this is the actual or each individual post in the GIF subreddit. So now we can start to see things like the permalink and different information about that post. And down here we even have the actual URL to the GIF. So if I just copy and paste that into here, we can see what that is. Hopefully it's nothing too obscene. Okay, there we go. Looks like some lightning. That's pretty cool. Alright, that's really cool actually. Okay, let's jump back into this now. So we've covered how to fetch some remote data using HTTP, and this is about all you'll really ever have to do, and it's almost always going to be this exact format. You'll grab the JSON string from some URL, you map it into a JSON object, subscribe to that, and then do whatever you need to do with that data inside the handler. Now I also said we were going to fetch some local data as well. You might have a JSON file that you just want to load that you're just bundling with your application. So we're going to create another function here called get local data. And we're just going to copy this exactly as it is. There really isn't any difference between the two methods. Now we're going to come back to this in just a second, but first we're going to have to create a data file for us to use. So we can add that to the assets folder here. And these are the static assets that get compiled with your application. So we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call that data. And inside of that, we're just going to create a file called just Reddit data.json. And to save myself from coming up with my own JSON string here, I'm just going to dump all of this data into this file. And you can see it actually looks a lot nicer when I paste it in here, because we can see a little bit of syntax highlighting going on. So if I save that and then jump back into the Reddit data provider here, all I have to do now is change this to a local path. So if I do assets/data/Reddit data.json, let me just check. Yes, that's it. Okay, so if I just supply that local path now and save that, and then modify this did load function to call get local data instead, hopefully we should see basically the exact same thing. And we do. We've got the same object with the same everything in here, except now it's coming from the local data. You can see it's coming from line 29 here. So if we jump in here, you can see that that's where it's being logged out. So it's coming from this function now, not the remote data function. So when you first come across this syntax and observables and things like subscribing, it can look pretty daunting and confusing, but the process for pulling in some JSON data into your application is pretty simple. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.